Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War news update, first part thereof for the 2nd of May 2024. Let's get straight to it and go to where we usually start, the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, you can find them in the description to the video below. We can see, I think Tim White said, for the 6th day in a row, over 1,000 personnel lost. For the 6th day in a row, and that is, I think, really significant. It shows that the Russians are pushing big time in the places where they think they are going to have some major success. I think there's 3 areas where they are majorly pushing. They are having some fairly significant success in terms of taking territory north of Avdiivka in the Ocheratina area, and joining that land up between there and Novokonyovo. So it did go, there was a bit of an encirclement area for the Russians on the Ukrainians. That's now been sort of equalized. But I think it does come at a huge cost, as I do keep saying. And it's really interesting listening to Kagan talking to, so the chap, what's his name? What's his first name? Is it William Kagan? Talking to Bill Crystal. So Kagan is to do with the ISW, also the American Enterprise Institute. I was wondering why the AEI was so pro-Ukraine, and they're actually quite involved. Some of the people involved in the AEI are involved with pro-Ukraine movements, which is very different to, say, the Heritage Foundation. Anyway, these different think tanks in the US that have very disparate views. But prior to the war would have been, mixing in the same circles. But yeah, listening to where Ukraine is going from here, where they go, what the outlook is for what Russia is doing, and then for what Ukraine is going to do after Russia's attack sort of peters out, whether they are gearing up for actually a major offensive, the Russians, in sort of summertime. And whether Ukrainians will be waiting till next spring really to do anything major, or wait till the Russian attack peters out and then take advantage straight away afterwards. Where will they be in terms of personnel, etc., etc. So all of these ideas I'm going to look at in my frontline update. I'm going to have a little bit of an analysis. I'm going to dip into that video. But anyway, right now, the Russians seem to be losing a lot of equipment and personnel. The question is, how deep are their reserves? There is this idea that they are stockpiling, ready for an offensive, so they aren't committing all their reserves to these attacks at the moment. And I was saying yesterday that doesn't make much sense to me, because they need to make hay while the sun shines. And at the moment, the sun is shining for Russia because Ukraine still doesn't have all of its Western equipment delivered. It has mobilization issues, personnel troubles, and so for me, I would just be throwing everything and the kitchen sink at the Ukrainians right now. But there is evidence that they are stockpiling equipment and personnel, maybe for a push elsewhere at a later point. Nonetheless, they've taken 20 tank losses yesterday, 29 APV losses and 20 artillery systems. Those are fairly significant numbers across the board there, particularly in terms of tanks. That's a really high number of tanks. I think there's 2 days now they've had high tank losses. There is quite a bit of footage coming out to show that the Russians are indeed losing quite a bit of equipment again. 4 anti-aircraft warfare systems is a very high number in that category. 49 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 8 pieces of special equipment. So high numbers there. Now remember, we saw a day of near parity yesterday in Andrew Perpetua's loss stats. And it has to be said that there is another day of near parity that came out. These stats from Andrew Perpetua, as he surveys the socials for the loss stats. Here we see him again, having statistics that are near parity. That's 2 days in a row. However, he has just brought out the latest stats, and they look very, very different. Because subsequent to this sort of almost parity for the 2nd day in a row, he then said Magyar's video today has like 140 video clips. In other words, 140 clips of stuff getting blown up in one video. One single. So sometimes you think, oh, it's parity, but then one side will drop a video of loads of equipment getting taken out, and that will have a huge effect on what the stats would look like on a particular day. So anyway, this 2nd day of near parity, let's have a look at the losses. So for the Ukrainians, A couple of boats damaged, M777 damaged, some BMPs, a few M113s, the old American armored personnel carriers, very old bit of kit, but they are still useful. Some of those destroyed or abandoned. BTRs, a few MRAPs, mine-resistant ambush protection vehicles like the Turkish-provided Kirpi, the Hedgehog there. So nothing of crazy value, but a fair amount of kit, I suppose. Now let's look at the Russians. We got 2 Buk air defense systems damaged, and I referenced a video to that yesterday. Interesting that the Warmate again being used to do some damage here. That's I believe a Polish loitering munition that seems to be getting quite a lot of usage at the moment. The Ukrainians have had that for a long time. Most of the war, I think, the Warmate has been given to the Ukrainians, but it seems to be coming into its own right now. Artillery, a few bits of artillery there, nothing too significant, only damaged. The 240mm Tulip self-propelled howitzer there. Then a number of tanks, different varieties, number of IFVs, infantry fighting vehicles, trucks, civilian vehicles, whatnot. Okay, so on balance, the Russians have had a worse day of it with regard to the types of equipment lost, particularly with a few Buk air defense systems being damaged. Don't know how severely damaged though. So slightly better day for the Ukrainians and the Russians there. Then, as mentioned, 140 video clips in one video. Let's see what that turns out. And oh my goodness. Right, so we've had 2 days of almost parity, and then we've got this. And that is just absolutely mind-blowing. Now, just looking at the colours there, you can see that the vast majority of that is civilian vehicles, as in SUVs, maybe ATVs up there, but SUVs, Bukankas, like Loaf, Scooby-Doo vans. These are the sort of vehicles that both sides use to do their logistics. They've pretty much run out of trucks. At the beginning of the war, I don't even remember, the beginning of the war, everyone was talking about Russia being a railway army. So because of the size of Russia, it depends on the railway to get their forces everywhere. And as a result, they don't have a huge depth of trucks. So in order to prosecute the kind of war they started doing at the beginning of the war, accidentally finding themselves in a war, some analysts were saying, well, the US would have 100,000 trucks to do that. And the Russians had 4,000 trucks because they're expecting to do everything by rail. And what happened is the Ukrainians knew that, and they blew up the railways into Ukraine, which meant the Russians were forced to do trucks. But it was also February, so it's Rasputitsa time, or Bezdarizhzhia time, where all the snows were soon to be melting, causing widespread mud quagmires. That then caused the poorly maintained trucks as they were, and the very few trucks that they had, comparatively speaking, to get stuck. This caused a massive logistic nightmare for the Russians. So at the beginning of the war, the Russians were in a load of trouble logistically because they simply didn't have the trucks. And the ones they did have were in a really bad state. 2 years later, you've had the attrition of those trucks that they did have to the point where they simply don't have enough trucks to do the job they need to do. And as a result, they rely largely on, or at least to a significant degree, on pickups, SUVs, vans, cars, loafs, and their own sort of civilian type vehicles to do the job of those Kamaz and Ural trucks. They still obviously have them, but it's just, yeah. And then when we look at what's going on around probably Krinky, most of this coming from, if it's coming from Magyar, you can see that the Ukraine is absolutely hammering the Russian logistics. Right, let's look at what the Ukrainians have lost. And we can see an AS-90 or Crab. They use the same turret, so it's difficult to work out which is which. One's a British supplied self-propelled howitzer, the other is a Polish supplied one that is made in a cooperation between Poland and South Korea. Right, we have a couple of Kirpis. Interesting that we're seeing a few more of them at the moment. The mine-resistant ambush protection vehicles, and that's pretty much that. Not too much to report in terms of Ukrainian losses. So it's a really good day. And then, my goodness me. So almost 10, possibly, no, it does look there is 10 two, four, six, 10, 9 or 10 surveillance cameras, comms equipment, and whatnot. We have a radar thrown in, a counter battery radar, possibly. Don't know which one it is, but that's taken out, and that will be significant. We've got 3 bits of artillery, including a multiple launch rocket system, but nothing too much in that category. And then we have a T-90 tank among the variety of tanks: T-80s, T-62s, T-72s. T-90M being the newest and best of the Russian tanks, ignoring the T-14 Armata. That is the breakthrough variant, which is their best, and that one there is abandoned, almost certainly to be hit by drones again after being abandoned. So quite a few tanks there, quite a few infantry fighting vehicles, BMPs, BMDs, BTRs. Then we have a number of armored personnel carriers, and then down to the trucks, ATVs, so 5 golf carts there, Desert Cross 1003s. And then look at the brownness of these. So these almost entirely destroyed, and all pretty much from FPV drones or drone IED dropping drones. And that is just a massive ton of just a huge mass of Russian equipment there. Wow, just absolutely incredible. And that... There's absolutely no doubt that is an unsustainable day of losses. And of course, that's not happened on a single day. That's a piece of montage footage that's probably happened over a week. So where there's been a bit more approaching parity, actually there is stuff happening every day that would suggest that's not the case. But it's getting stored up for a single video that then gets dropped, and then bosh, there you go. So that is, as mentioned, unsustainable for the Russians. Now, in terms of personnel losses, of course, we've got to understand that things are really tough for the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are on their knees. They don't have enough equipment. They are losing territory in a couple of places, fairly significantly so, at least comparatively. But when you zoom out, it's actually not it's not as bad as you might think. But it is compared to the level of territory ceded prior to that, it is comparatively fairly challenging for the Ukrainians. But the Russians it's incurring a huge cost on the Russians this. So Jay and Kiev, I can't show you this video, but it is really disturbing. So in pursuit of territorial gains, Russians no longer waste time collecting the rotting corpses of their comrades. Just forward, destroy, occupy the ruins, call it Russia. Russians will allow the Tsar to do anything to them. So here is an absolutely insane video. If it's the one there are 2 videos here, both of them are insane. No, okay. So this is one of a Russian soldier walking basically down I think it's by the side of a road. There are dead Russian soldiers everywhere, and it looks like they've been there for about 10 days. And he's saying it absolutely stinks. This is disgusting. This is not what you see on the TV channels at home. And he's basically speaking to Russian people back at home, saying this is freaking apocalyptic. And it's just dead bodies and equipment, and it's horrific. And the idea is that they're not picking up bodies. So the Russian loss stats that they'd be compiling themselves would be so warped, because they have no idea how many they've lost in terms of. I mean, this is why everyone's listed as missing, because they don't bother going to pick them up, because of course they have to pay more money if they are picked up and then found to be dead. And then they have to pay compensation. So if they're missing in action, they don't have to pay compensation. So it's in the best interest of the Russian MOD not to pick up corpses. But what that means is there is so many families back in Russia just not knowing the outcome of the war in terms of their the existence of their relatives. Here is another video, and again, I can't show it to you. It's absolutely insane. So it's someone going through what was a forest is now just broken stumps, those thin kind of tree trunks, apocalyptic scene, sort of trenches and dugouts all woven into the trees, and the number of Russian bodies that half of them half buried. It's just an insane video of an apocalypse. It's just incredible. So the idea of me talking about this is that when we go back and say, right, 1,030 troops are claimed to have been killed or wounded yesterday in combat, and 2 videos come out in a day, where I think if you added those dead bodies up in just 2 little videos, you'd have well over 100 dead bodies or whatnot. It's just, and you can extrapolate what you can see visually around you, particularly in this video where it's walking around a much larger area of destruction. You can imagine it's just extrapolated in most directions there. The sheer number of people that are being attrited, that are being killed in this senseless war. And these are Russians. Now, are there equivalent videos of Ukrainian deaths? I don't know. But what I can tell you is that there are phenomenal numbers of Russians dying, it appears. And if the other thing is, if you don't believe that 1,030 Russians may have perished yesterday, and then you see a loss list like that and think, well, in every single one of those vehicles, virtually apart from the abandoned ones, but they've been abandoned because they've been hit, you will have had injured or dead Russian soldiers, right? So every one of and sometimes if it's a vehicle with sometimes you might have 20 people associated with that vehicle. Now, it's not to say that all of them will die, but there are times where you are going to get funded. I saw a tank that was hit and a BMP that just absolutely blew up. Both of them just massively blew up. You're like, if there was anyone in there, they would be dead. And so, yeah, not all of these will include personnel losses, but if a lot of them do, or some of them do, and if in each one of those you have multiple people, this then justifies the claim that the Ukrainians have here, which over 1,000 people died yesterday. It becomes eminently more believable. It's like piecing these bits of the jigsaw together. Now, since February 2022, Russians have destroyed 210 healthcare facilities and damaged 1,588 more. The Ministry of Health also said that the Russian forces looted 125 emergency medical vehicles and destroyed 260 of them. That's according to the Sumy Regional Military Administration. It's, that's what the Russians do. That's how they go about their war business. Now, this is a significant bit of footage because it shows ATACMS being used against a military training base, apparently, in Luhansk Oblast, 84 kilometers from the front line. So that's just in range of the normal ATACMS, but these look like cluster ATACMS that may or may not have, that probably have a longer range. Anyway, supposedly 100 Russian soldiers were hit here. And again, that's going to feed into these large numbers that we see on a daily basis of personnel losses. I don't know how easy it is to work out whether there's other footage apart from this. I don't know. I can't see any human beings, to be honest, but I don't really know what I'm looking at. Now, in this footage, you have what appears to be an ATACMS landing here. That is a dud. Because all the other three have cluster munitions. So I imagine that didn't detonate in midair for the cluster munitions to spread, and it just hit itself straight away. But then there are 3 others. That's a cluster there. You can see how widespread the clusters, those submunitions are in terms of the spread. Then you get another one happening. That's looking more closely over in that direction, and then a 4th one happening a little bit later somewhere else nearby. So basically, you can go and check that. There you go. You can go and check that out. It's difficult to know precisely what damage is done, but the claim is that say 100 troops were hit in those strikes. So you got 4 ATACMS being used there. I looked at that footage, and actually the full one is like 6.5 minutes long as it's kind of surveying the whole area. And I guess maybe there's satellite imagery that's better than that gives them an indication that there are lots of troops operating. I often think you're better using ATACMS against things like air bases and whatnot. But hey, they obviously have the information and I don't. And so one assumes that was a good use for ATACMS missiles. Okay. Quote, another example of how more advanced weapon systems suffer from a lack of software adaptability is in the M982 Excalibur GPS-guided precision artillery projectiles. Okay, so those are the artillery rounds shot out of a howitzer that has, it's a PGM, precision guided munition, so it has GPS guidance. So it is more precise than just whacking a dumb shell out there, and it relying solely on the trajectory of and physics of going out of the tube, out of the barrel, and then finding its place. The PGM Excalibur rounds will have guidance and fins and the ability to move in the air accordingly. And they had apparently initially an efficiency of 70%. I was not sure what the efficiency would be anyway. I was thinking, oh, that's not as good as I thought it was. But anyway, who knows? Maybe that is pretty good for an artillery round. However, after 6 weeks, their effectiveness dropped but to 6%. To 6%. As Russia adapted and deployed various electronic warfare tools to counter them. Wow. So then only 6 out of 100. And those are expensive rounds. We saw them have a load of success. If you remember, there are so many videos like that. Looks like it's an Excalibur round. That looks like it's an Excalibur round. And then they kind of stopped. And I presumed it's because they weren't being provided to Ukraine. However, it could well be that they were still being provided. It's just that they were being countered by mitigation from the Russians in terms of electronic warfare. That's a statement of Dr. Daniel Patt, Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute, before the House Committee on Armed Services Subcommittee on Cyber, Information Technologies and Innovation. So that was on March the 13th in 2024. So that was a good month or so ago. And then we have yesterday news that possibly a HIMARS has been taken out. Allegedly 2 HIMARS, but War Vehicle Tracker here says it looks like it's 1 HIMARS and a truck. Strikes on allegedly 2 M142 HIMARS MLRS hiding in a tree line. There's definitely 1 HIMARS, but there is no secondary explosions. Of course, it doesn't, just because there are no secondary explosions doesn't mean it's a decoy or that it's not successful. It could well be a HIMARS that's fired its missiles and there's nothing explosive on board. And maybe the fuel on board didn't get done over, but it's also likely that HIMARS won't be operational. About the second one, I think it might be an FMTV M1083A1P2 Oshkosh supply truck. The footage isn't brilliant, so some people are like dismissing this. But I think there's probably a high likelihood that a HIMARS has been damaged here. But who knows? I think, Andrew Perpetua and others have got involved in sort of looking at that. Right, moving on to distant strikes. So the first thing to note is that Odessa yet again was absolutely hammered by the Russians yesterday. The Novopochta warehouse or sorting facility, which, if you remember, there was one of those that was targeted up in Kharkiv back maybe last year. Big sorting facility, maybe even in 2022, was hammered by the Russians. Here they've taken out in a big way that Novopochta site. And again, you're thinking, really? Odessa is just coming under such a lot of pressure at the moment. Yet another horrific Russian missile strike on Odessa, says Ilya Ponomarenko. A large depot used by Novopochta, Ukraine's civilian shipment service, is reported to have been targeted. At least 13 were injured as of now, he says, and that's what it looks like. Today, it was, completely destroyed, and a significant strike that was. Again, ballistic missiles hitting Odessa. Odessa is the target number 1 at the moment, I think, for the Russians. On the flip side, the Ukrainians were fairly active in striking at certain targets inside Russia. Drones attacked infrastructure in the Russian regions of Orel and Smolensk. 3 explosions occurred at the Afipsk refinery in Krasnodar Krai, local media reported. Also, according to the Russian Defense Ministry, Kursk, Belgorod, Rostov and Bryansk regions were also attacked last night. And quite often what happens is you just don't know what the outcome is. So it could be that Ukraine has targeted some seriously useful objectives there, maybe airfields, maybe, I don't know, but we just don't know. There's no footage, or they've targeted those places, but that the drones were shot down, electronic warfare, whatever. We don't know what the success rate is of drones. I was talking about this the other day, particularly in light of the snow's melting around Moscow, and then finding a load of Ukrainian drones in the fields or in the land around Moscow. You're like, okay, so there are more drones that are fired at these targets than we know about, because at least a significant number of them don't reach their targets, I imagine. So anyway, those places apparently were targeted. Who knows what's actually happened? And it could be that the Ukrainians are being far more successful than we realize, or that actually that silence on those targets means that there really wasn't any significant damage done to them. Power outages, though, have been reported in Russian regions bordering Ukraine after a night drone attack that reportedly targeted the Afipsky oil refinery. It comes after yesterday's drone attack that saw a fire erupt in the Ryazan refinery. So subsequent nights of oil refineries being hit, I presume that they are overcoming the American request that the Ukrainians don't strike at the Russian oil refinery infrastructure. A fire in Russia's Smolensk Oblast is reported following the night drone. Locals heard the sounds of explosions at the Rozhkovsky region all night. Governor Anakin confirms the attack and says a target was civilian power infrastructure. So here we have more claims that Oriol region energy infrastructure was hit. And certainly it appears the case so a drone has hit a substation between Kozlov and Bichatnik in the Rozlavl district of Smolensk region. So it could well be oil refinery and substations being hit. There's also quite a bit of damage done to somewhere in the occupied Horlivka region. So is that Donetsk or just into Luhansk? That's north of Donetsk city. Russia says only one person was injured by the shelling. Something was targeted there. And then we have, as often is the case, details come out much later after attacks take place, such as the drone attacks last night. We might get satellite imagery coming out a week or two later to say, oh yeah, something was destroyed or damaged. So Ukrainian is burning down Russian fuel distribution logistics, says Trent Zelenko, in answer to this satellite imagery that shows that this is all the way back in April the 20th, an oil depot in Kardyamovo in Smolensk region was attacked by drones and completely burned down. Of the 16 fuel tanks, only 2 survived, and 9 smaller tanks with fuel and lubricants burned. So if we see here, you can see down that one, possibly that one in the bottom left survived, and then one there survived. But again, you can't tell the damage and when they're connected underground. It could be that you destroy all of these, you destroy those two by extension. So that looks like that's quite a successful strike, or a very successful strike, on Russian oil logistics. Right, let's move on to other bits and pieces. And we're going to start with the US Department of State is currently delivering to Congress a determination pursuant to the Chemical and Biological Weapons Control and Warfare Elimination Act of 1991 regarding Russia's use of chemical weapons, specifically chlorpyrifrin, against Ukrainian troops. Now, this is, if that's happened, obviously that's super bad, etc., etc. John Ridge is like, not sure what's going on here, because Russia doesn't stock chloropyrifrin or PS as a chemical agent for battlefield use. The claimed PS munitions are tear gas, CS munitions. So there's supposedly widespread use of CS, and you can see that on footage as well. There's plenty of footage around. I was looking at some this morning. Yeah, that one there. Footage in that first tweet from Max23 shows the use of gas, but it's more likely CS gas, and it's still a violation of the Chemical Weapons Convention. But this is a basic issue of fact, says John Ridge. Like, unless they know something that John Ridge doesn't about what chemicals are being used on the battlefield. Anyway, next, the reports of this. Russia used chemical weapons during the war in Ukraine. The US has accused Russia of using chemical weapons against the Ukrainian military. This is stated in a statement by the US Department of State. Lots of state there. It is specified that the Russian military used the asphyxiant chloropyrifrin. Quote, the use of such chemicals is probably caused by the desire of the Russian troops to dislodge Ukrainian forces from fortified positions and achieve tactical success on the battlefield. Statement reads, it is also noted that Russian troops are using the chemicals to disperse protests in Ukraine. Chloropycerin is blacklisted by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. It was used by German troops during the First World War. So maybe that wasn't the gas that's being used, but then you'd think the Department of State would have good evidence for those claims. Anyway, moving on, military intelligence states that Russia is flying attack drones over occupied Zaporizhzhia power plant. So that is a nuclear power plant. This has been talked about quite a bit recently. So Russia is flying its kamikaze drones over the reactors of the occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, risking, quote, catastrophic consequences, Ukraine's military intelligence has said. As evidence, the agency published intercepted camera footage of the Russian drone over the plant. Its flight path supposedly indicates the direction toward the Ukrainian-held communities of Nikopol and Marhanets that are just above in fact, you can see it here. So here you've got Erno-Hodai, you've got the Zaporizhzhia reservoir there, or what's left of it, and then north of there you've got Nikopol and Marhanets, and they're flying either from or over the nuclear power plant. Now, I would actually suggest that this is quite clever from Russia. They already store a lot of military equipment inside. We've got video evidence of that and photographic evidence that they've got a lot of trucks and equipment inside the nuclear power plant because they know it's a bit like hiding vehicles under or in hospitals that has happened previously. The thing is, places like Russia, they have no compunction in striking hospitals, but nuclear power plant, everyone's afraid to strike that because that's not good for anyone. And so you've got this kind of sanctuary here that can't be hit, that they know the Ukrainians won't hit, and so therefore it's quite a sensible place to hide. I'm not talking about the morality of this. I'm not talking about war crimes or anything like that, but just from a purely functional military point of view, the Russians are obviously going to hide a bunch of stuff there. And indeed, it would make sense for them, if they're going to hide equipment there, to operate dangerous equipment out of there, such as attack drones. So if you have your drone, and even I wonder, howitzers and things like that, like if you can operate your attack drones out of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, then your teams can't get hit because the Ukrainians are not going to risk sending munitions into a nuclear power plant. I wonder whether they will risk attacking units and equipment with just FPV drones. So a small FPV drone, it might sound really horrific if you're going to send those into a nuclear power plant, but actually it's relatively safe. Like that's an explosion that's not going to set off a reactor. The reactors are constructed to withstand nuclear strikes, right? Supposedly, like big missile strikes. So an FPV drone with a RPG-7 warhead hitting a drone crew on the grounds of a nuclear power plant, I would say is probably quite safe. Now, lots of people will probably kick off about that. It might be a PR disaster and Russia might shout about that. But I imagine that Ukraine probably are sending drones into the power plant because I would probably do that. I would think that's fairly sensible. It's only the PR thing that you got to contend with. And I imagine Russia would be sending things from out of that nuclear power plant. So it becomes a bit of a hot potato, that one. Now, I've not seen this reported anywhere else, so take this with a pinch of salt. This is Visegrad, who aren't always totally reliable. The Russian army has machine gunned hundreds of cows to death near Kharkiv. Their attempt to starve millions of Ukrainians continues. We're moving towards the 1930s again. I mean, there is an imagery of huge amounts of dead cows, and I hope that hasn't happened, but it might well have happened. Now, I don't know how accurate this is either. There are a number of pictures that are out about concerning these. It apparently are kids that have painted or drawn these pictures. I've seen another one as well, but I look at these and think those kids haven't drawn that. That's. I've seen kids' drawings before, right? And they aren't that good. They just aren't. And I wonder whether this is Russian adults creating these pictures and then getting the kids to draw stuff on top of it, and then it looks like these smiling kids have drawn these. I don't know. I can bet you can bet your bottom dollar those kids don't know how to draw a tank like that as well as that without help from adults. And yeah, so I think there's something else going on here. However, the idea that you got kids around this, and as someone says here, the next generation of Russians, and not to mention the militarization of children. This isn't healthy either way. You know, even if adults were behind most of the art there, if you're going to have kids smiling in front of these pictures, it's just a pretty insidious use of children. And then finally, Elon Musk getting involved in nonsense about Russia again. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate your support. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon. I don't know. I might have to pop out and vote. We've got local elections. Not the general election, but local elections. It's going to be very interesting to see the fallout of that with what the polls are looking like at the moment. Anyway, Toodle Pip, speak soon.